Eric Swalwell's suspension of his campaign, it's long overdue. Multiple women, including former staffers, they've come forward with serious, credible allegations of sexual assault and misconduct. Now, this is the same Eric Swalwell the Democratic establishment and its media allies have elevated for years. This isn't the California Democratic Party suddenly discovering ethics or standing up for victims. This is a cold, calculated purge by a ruthless political machine that protects its own. Red flags about his own personal conduct were ignored, minimized, or joked about. Those warnings were always there. They just didn't matter as long as he served the machine.
The only way that they even knew it came forward is when they went to nominate him to the Intel Committee. And then the FBI came and told the leadership then, he's got a problem. And they kept him on.
Do not for a second believe this moment represents some noble moral reckoning in Sacramento. Swalwell's suspension changes nothing at the core. The consultants, the big donors, the media allies will simply pivot to the next polished face. The reality is that the people of California, they are victims every bit as deserving of sympathy and accountability as those alleging misconduct by politicians like Swalwell. Democrats have controlled the California legislature with an iron fist since the mid-1990s. Supermajorities for most of the last decade plus, and they've held every statewide office for years, unchecked and unchallenged. And what have they delivered? Eric Swalwell's suspension of his campaign, it's long overdue. Multiple women, including former staffers, they've come forward with serious, credible allegations of sexual assault and misconduct. And the backlash was swift. Endorsements evaporated. Staffers quit. Fellow Democrats called for him to step aside. Good. Get out. It's about time. But do not for a second believe this moment represents some noble moral reckoning in Sacramento. This isn't the California Democratic Party suddenly discovering ethics or standing up for victims. This is a cold, calculated purge by a ruthless political machine that protects its own. Until, of course, the moment protecting them becomes a liability. The victims are useful today only because discarding Swalwell helps the party survive a wide open 2026 governor's race. Power first, victim second, or never. Now, this is the same Eric Swalwell the Democratic establishment and its media allies have elevated for years. You know, this slick, combative Bay Area congressman who performed outrage on cable news while red flags about his own personal conduct were ignored, minimized, or joked about. Those warnings were always there. They just didn't matter as long as he served the machine. So now the outrage is loud and theatrical. Spare us. This isn't principle. We all know that. It's political triage in a crowded Democratic primary where the party fears its own dysfunction could hand the race to Republicans. That's all. The machine sacrifices a damaged piece to save the board. And Swalwell, I mean, he is far from the only one with serious baggage. Look at Katie Porter, one of the leading Democratic contenders now out there clapping that Swalwell is out of this. You know, viral videos show her, Porter, screaming at a staffer during a professional call with the energy secretary. "Get out of my effing shot," she screams. A former aides describe a toxic workplace of berating, humiliation, and sky-high turnover. Her ex-husband detailed in divorce filings years of alleged verbal and physical abuse, including the infamous incident where she allegedly dumped a bowl of scalding hot mashed potatoes on his head, burning his scalp. She, like Swalwell, has denied the worst of it. She's offered vague statements, like Swalwell, about falling short, but the party has not applied anything close to the pressure it put on Swalwell. And the rest of the Democratic field carries its own heavy load. Xavier Becerra, former attorney general and Biden's HHS secretary, he spent years pushing the policies many blame for exploding healthcare costs, immigration chaos, and pandemic mismanagement. Antonio Villaraigosa, former Los Angeles mayor, he left office with persistent failure on crime, on homelessness, and basic governance that still haunts the city. Tony Thurmond, the state superintendent, He presides over schools with declining test scores and chronic absenteeism. Tom Steyer, the billionaire climate activist, champions the very environmental mandates that have driven energy prices through the roof. Matt Mahan, Betty Yee, and others, they all swim in the exact same Sacramento ecosystem that has normalized failure after failure after failure. These behaviors, right, bullying, alleged domestic volatility, policy wreckage, they may not always hit the narrow outrage threshold Democrats reserve exclusively for sexual misconduct, but they still expose deep character and leadership flaws. Here's the deeper indictment. While the party obsesses over selective personal scandals, it has left behind a far larger trail of victims across the state. You know, Swalwell's female victims potentially are not the only ones, right? Democrats have controlled the California legislature with an iron fist since the mid-1990s. Supermajorities for most of the last decade plus, and they've held every statewide office for years, unchecked and unchallenged. And what have they delivered? A homelessness crisis with over 180,000 people living on the streets, tent encampments, blighting neighborhoods from San Francisco to Los Angeles, while billions of taxpayer dollars disappear into bureaucratic sinks with little to show for it. Skyrocketing crime in major cities, enabled by soft-on-crime prosecutors and sanctuary policies that too often prioritize illegal immigrants over law-abiding Californians, leaving families terrified in their own neighborhoods and small businesses ravaged. Housing costs that have made the California dream a nightmare. Median home prices over $750,000, rents crushing working families. With radical environmental rules and restrictive zoning that deliberately chokes the supply. Energy prices are among the highest in the nation. Utilities 60% above the national average. This punishes who? Middle-class budgets, while elites lecture about climate virtue. And the human exodus. California lost hundreds of thousands of residents in recent years. Net domestic outmigration of over 200,000 in some recent tallies, as families and businesses flee to states where life is still affordable. People who leave report dramatically lower housing costs, more home ownership, and breathing room they could not find in the state of California because of Democratic Party policies. These are not statistics, by the way. These are victims. Real people, the single mom priced out of the neighborhood she grew up in, the small business owner driven into bankruptcy by taxes, regulations, and crime, the elderly couple living in fear because open drug use and disorder have taken over their block, the children trapped in failing schools, the working families watching their quality of life evaporate while Sacramento tells them to accept it as the price of progress. The reality is that the people of California, they are victims every bit as deserving of sympathy and accountability as those alleging misconduct by politicians like Swalwell. Because this once golden state itself has become a victim, systematically hollowed out, not by external forces, but by the very political class that claims to love it most. A one-party fiefdom that is untethered from reality, from consequence, or basic competence. So Swalwell's suspension changes nothing at the core. The consultants, the big donors, the media allies will simply pivot to the next polished face. Porter, that's a tough face to polish, I got to admit. Becerra, Villaraigosa, Steyer, whoever survives the scramble, complete with their own unreckoned sins. The tent cities will keep growing. The costs will keep soaring. The exodus will continue. And the political class will keep preaching California values while presiding over decline, dysfunction, and despair. The real test for these Democrats is simple and it's brutal. Will they apply anything resembling consistent standards? Will they demand the same accountability from Katie Porter for her documented treatment of staff and family that they demanded from Swalwell? Will they reckon honestly with the leadership failures littering their entire field? More importantly, will they show even a fraction of this sudden performative compassion for the millions of Californians their policies have victimized over decades of iron-fisted rule? The working families, the entrepreneurs, the communities ground down by Sacramento's failures? Or will those victims remain invisible, acknowledged only when politically useful, discarded the rest of the time? I mean, until California Democrats answer those questions with real action instead of theater, Swalwell's exit is no victory for justice or reform. It's merely the latest chapter in the Democrat machine's tired playbook, selective self-preservation, which is dressed up as moral leadership. California absolutely deserves better. Its people, the true victims who built this state and still love it, have suffered long enough under this failed experiment. The machine has had its chance, more than its chance. And the results speak for themselves. A cautionary tale. That's what we say about California. It's not a model. So it's time for accountability that actually matters, not just for one scandal, the Swalwell scandal, but for the systemic wreckage inflicted on an entire state. The victims of personal misconduct certainly deserve justice. But you know what? The victims of disastrous governance, they deserve it even more. This is Drew Allen with the Daily Signal.